What would you do if your star pilot, 7 times world champion, cannot control his car as he should? What if the cause was not the pilot, but something that not even you as team leader had detected? This is exactly what Vasseur discovered, and can change the course of Ferrari. The steering wheel corrections, subtle but constant, were an obvious symptom that something did not fit. This lit the alarms in the box. While the technicians refined configurations and analyzed parameters in search of a track, Frédéric Vasseur decided to intervene directly. It was not a standard decision. It was not usual for the director to get involved so soon in such specific matters. But there was a powerful reason. The data did not reflect any obvious problem, and yet the car's behavior was not consistent with the predictions of the simulator. And if something has learned Vasseur since his arrival in Ferrari, it is that when Hamilton says something is going wrong, you have to listen. The analysis began with a cross-comparison between the Leclerc and Hamilton car. What they found was not an obvious failure or a structural defect. It was something much more subtle and worrying. Hamilton's SF25 presented a lack of synchrony between the motor brake response, the ERS energy regeneration, and the delivery of torque in mixed phases, such as the transition between braking and reacting. This generated a micro-disequilibrium of charges that, although invisible to the naked eye, was enough to alter the sensation of control in the steering wheel. The most striking, that behavior did not appear in the Leclerc data, because its piloting style, more aggressive in braking and less dependent on the roll of curve, hid it. Vasseur immediately understood what he had in hand. It wasn't just a matter of Hamilton adaptation. It was not a simple acclimatization process to a new environment. It was a deep technical problem that simulation had not revealed. One that only became evident with a pilot of Hamilton's exact characteristics, and who could put in check not only his individual performance, but the team's ability to evolve the car properly. Because if that mismatch was not understood and solved, all the information that the British could provide would be distorted. The hidden problem was not just a technician. It was structural, even cultural. Ferrari, for years, had developed its cars based on a very specific pilot philosophy, based on pilots such as Leclerc and, in previous years, Vettel or Sainz. The arrival of Hamilton brought with it a new standard of technical demand and mechanical sensitivity that the team should learn to assimilate quickly. And this first great finding of Vasseur, in the very starting of the season, was not a setback. It was a warning that, if they wanted to make Ferrari a truth champion team, they should also evolve in the way of listening and interpreting their most experienced pilot. Hamilton's analysis did not stop in Melbourne. Vasseur, even without definitive responses, summoned a small group of key engineers to review in detail each layer of the electronic architecture of the SF25. The session lasted hours. Telemetry data, real-time simulations were crossed, and the acceleration and braking maps of the Leclerc car and Hamilton's turn. It was then that what nobody expected appeared. A millimeter desynchronization, but consisting of the integration between the ERS and the regenerative braking system. A micro detail. A tiny delay. But in Formula One, where a millisecond can be the difference between victory and anonymity, those details are what separate a brilliant car from a mediocre one. This delay generated a chain effect. Every time Hamilton released the accelerator waiting for the car to begin to gently decelerate the motor brake, the system delivered a small negative torque pulse that interrupted the natural progression of braking. This effect was amplified by its pilot style, which depends on a precise modulation of the pedal and the feedback of the car in real time. The SF25 in that state did not provide it. It was as if he were playing a piece of piano refined for another interpreter. The engineers, once they understood the problem, called it adaptive synchronization latency. It was an imperfection in the algorithm that manages the distribution of energy between the kinetic and thermal recovery systems, directly affecting the dynamic balance of the car in mixed phases. In Leclerc, that lag was absorbed by its aggressiveness when braking, which almost cut the motor brake participation at the root. But in Hamilton, who works with more sensitivity in the entry of curve and soft transitions, latency became an invisible barrier. Vasseur knew that this was not a simple patch. It was a turning point. From there, an internal redesign of the dynamic control system began. Energy delivery maps were rewritten and software engineers were ordered to prioritize a new development, what they called internally dynamic adaptive maps. These maps would be able to automatically adjust in the style of each pilot, processing data in real time and reconfiguring the distribution of the regenerative torque to respond as a glove to individual preferences. Hamilton, informed of the discovery, asked for a complete session at the Maranello simulator. The agenda was clear: to test the new algorithm under variable conditions, simulating not only slow and medium curves, but also technical sequences such as those of Suzuka and Barcelona, where the combined braking and passing through curve are critical. The results were immediate. Hamilton began to mark more consistent times in simulator, his corrections behind the wheel were reduced and confidence when entering curve returned. But the most revealing arrived on the royal track. In the next Grand Prix in China, Hamilton showed a completely different performance. Not only was it more competitive since Friday, but for the first time in its short step by Ferrari, it seemed in total car control. He no longer struggled against him. "I used it." And that was enough for sprint classification to be placed among the best three, even surprising the most skeptical analysts. Ferrari then understood that they had not only solved a problem, they had found an innovation opportunity. Vasseur went personally to the technical team and made it clear that this solution was not exclusive to Hamilton. The system should be the future of the development of the Scuderia, a car capable of adapting to its pilot and not vice versa. In a category where the margins are increasingly narrow and the differences are played in imperceptible tenths, Ferrari had found a revolutionary idea that could make a real difference. Once the technical failure was corrected and after implementing the new adaptive maps, the internal implications for Ferrari were immediate and deep. What had begun as a technical anomaly became, in a matter of weeks, a strategic turning point. Frédéric Vasseur soon understands that the discovered was not just a punctual improvement. It was a gateway to a new development philosophy, one that demanded to abandon the traditional monolithic approach in Maranello. It was no longer enough to build a fast car. An intelligent car had to be built, capable of molding to the peculiarities of each pilot, even at levels as subtle as the pressure on the brake or the way to modulate the opening of the accelerator in the lateral load phase. The public validation of this technical revolution came in Shanghai. In much more representative conditions than in Melbourne, Hamilton emerged with a security that until then seemed absent. During the classification to sprint, he made a precise, millimeter return, in which each curve seemed to fit perfectly with his style. The car sensors reflected a new harmony: lower energy consumption, less steering wheel corrections, and a more constant power delivery at the exit of the slower curves. The SF-25, which until a few days ago behaved like a foreign body, finally responded fluently, as if it had been designed with Hamilton's DNA from the beginning. This leap in performance had a double consequence. On the one hand, he reinforced Hamilton's figure within the team. He was no longer the veteran who had to adapt. Now he was the pilot who had forced a structural improvement in Ferrari. Its technical influence and its ability to identify invisible failures became an indispensable asset. On the other hand, he presented a historical weakness of the Scuderia: its excessive dependence on a single way of piloting. Vasseur then ordered a complete audit of the simulator and pilot development system, with the aim of expanding the input variables and ensuring that the 2026 car can live together from the design with completely different styles. In parallel, work with Leclerc began to evaluate whether the new adaptive maps could also optimize their performance. Although in his case the initial problem was not so obvious, the engineers detected that there were profit margins if the energy recovery peaks were adjusted to better coincide with their most aggressive braking pattern. The goal was clear: not making a car for Hamilton, but making a Ferrari that could unlock 100% of the potential of both pilots. For the first time in a long time, the word adaptability became part of the daily vocabulary in Maranello. In addition, this forced redesign pushed the team to share the concept of adaptive maps with its technical partners. In collaboration with Magneti Marelli and Bosch Motorsport, Ferrari initiated a co-development phase to apply artificial intelligence in the dynamic car behavior prediction, based on tens of individual parameters of each pilot. The next step is that the car can adjust in real time the rigidity of regenerative braking, the delivery of torque, and the deployment mode of the ERS according to the style recorded in each session. It is an ambitious concept, but the first prototypes are already in the phase of virtual tests. The key point is that what began as a silent distrust of Hamilton towards the car ended up unleashing an evolution that could now benefit every Ferrari. And even more important, this episode has left a clear lesson for the entire Formula One. In the era of digital precision, the sensitivity of a pilot can be more valuable than 1,000 simulations. When he is heard, when translated into engineering, he can completely change the course of a team. This technical finding not only reconfigures the immediate present of Ferrari, it also raises a question that goes beyond mechanics, beyond pure performance analysis. What really implies that a pilot like Lewis Hamilton has forced such a deep change within a structure as rigid as Maranello's? And even more important, what tells us about the real role of the pilot in the modern Formula One? Ferrari, who for decades has fought against his own management demons, has just taken a step that can mark an era. And you who are seeing this have a place in this story. Because now that you know what happened behind the cameras, you can start looking at the next races with a different magnifying glass. You can observe the configuration decisions, the Hamilton radios, the gestures of Leclerc, even the way the car behaves in each curve input. Because now you know that car has been rewritten. Non-redesigned, rewritten. From within. So here is the big question. Are we facing the beginning of a new era in Ferrari, led from cockpit by Hamilton? Or this technical adjustment, although brilliant, is too late to compete with the constant evolution of McLaren and the raw power of Red Bull? Leave me your answer in the comments.